Hey guys, I'm Ava, and let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Today we are going to be looking at a budget Eldlich deck. I think this deck is really great right now, and it's also just really easy to learn how to play because your main combo line is basically to just set and pass. So the Eldlich deck revolves around light zombie types, and specifically it is heavily trap reliant, which is pretty interesting in the meta right now because, as you know, traps aren't super popular. So our boss monster is going to be Eldlich the Golden Lord. He just got reprinted in maximum gold, so he is a lot cheaper than he used to be, and that's why this deck is able to be budget friendly. And in fact, a lot of these cards got reprinted. Aside from him, we will also be running Ecclesia, and those are our only two monsters. I'll get into that a bit more. But you can also see that we are only going to be running 4 spells, and then the rest of our cards are all traps. So the way Eldlich works is you have some trap cards that also will function as monsters for your deck, and then you have Eldlich. This deck relies on getting cards into the graveyard, and then you can bring them back onto the field or activate their effects from the graveyard to get other cards from the deck into your hand. So starting with Eldlich, he is our boss monster, and he has a few effects that make him really good. Also note that he is a level 10 light, which gives you a lot of options to work with in terms of support cards, which is really nice. So Eldlich's first effect is that you can send him and a spell or trap card from your hand to the graveyard, and then target one card on the field and send it to the graveyard. So this can be used in a lot of ways in this deck. Obviously you can send one of your opponent's cards, but you can also pitch one of yours if you want to use its graveyard effect, which you often will want to in this deck. And also the card you send with him can have a benefit as well. For example, if you send yugioh with him, you can set an Eldlich card directly from your deck, which is really nice. You could also use Conquistador for the same effect, which is good because they're both only once per turn, but you can use each of them once per turn, which is pretty nice. So Eldlich's second effect is basically what's going to let us recycle him. We can send a spell or trap that we control to the graveyard. So this, like I said, could be one of our yugiohs or Conquistadors. Then we can add Eldlich to our hand, and we can also special summon a zombie monster from our hand. Also note that it does gain 1,000 attack and defense, which is pretty solid, and it cannot be destroyed by card effects, which is pretty great. So next up we have Ecclesia, which is kind of a random addition to this deck, but it actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Ecclesia is a light monster, so it works really well with a lot of our other cards. Specifically, it'll be useful if we are playing Gozen match, in which we can only control one attribute. For us, of course, it's going to be light monsters, and Ecclesia fits into that, and it will just be really good for blocking out our opponent. So Ecclesia is great because we can get a free special summon from her, but her more important effect is that we can get ourselves a Dogmatica punishment. So this card is really good in this deck. Basically, we can send a card from our extra deck to the graveyard and destroy an opponent's monster. This is really great because this extra deck is designed to have a lot of cards that will have effects that are activated in the graveyard. Specifically, we have Ash Dragon, which you really want to run if you're running Ecclesia. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon or add to your hand your Ecclesia, so you can do this cycle all over again and get yourselves another Dogmatica punishment and get another card in the graveyard, which is really nice. So this is particularly good if you are drawing into Dogmatica punishment, and so you'll still have your Ecclesia in your deck, presumably. You can use this to get the Ecclesia, and then you can also get yourselves a second Dogmatica punishment, which is really nice. I'll get more into the other extra deck monsters later, but keep in mind that their graveyard effects are going to be fairly important for a lot of these, and that's why they're included, and that's why this deck is so flexible. The extra deck monsters are really here for support, so you have a lot of options, especially if you're looking for something budget conscious. You don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on these cards. So next up we have Card of Demise, which I think makes a lot of sense in this deck. First, you get to drop to 3 cards, and although your opponent doesn't take any damage, it's still a really good card, especially because at the end of your turn, you can send your entire hand to the graveyard, which in the context of this deck is actually really good. But also note that you cannot special summon the turn you activate this card, so be mindful of when you're playing that. And that also goes for Pot of Duality. You can excavate the top 3 cards of your deck and choose one of them, but you also cannot special summon during that turn. So these two you just want to be mindful when you use them, but if you are careful, they will be very helpful to you. Next up we have Dogmatica Punishment, which we have already talked about. Also note that this does have a special summoning restriction as well, which is that you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck after it's activated, but that's not too much of a detriment in terms of this deck, since, as I said, a lot of those are just for support, and if you play it strategically, if you need any out, you can use them before you activate this. Then we have our Eldlich trap. So this card is going to allow us to special summon a monster from our deck or graveyard, specifically a zombie type, we are going to be going for our Eldlich with this, and it's really easy because it's just a great way to get him out on the field. And you can only special zombie monsters after this card resolves, which is no big deal in this deck. Also, it has a secondary effect in the graveyard wherein you can banish it and set yourself a golden land spell or trap. So that would be our yugioh or our Conquistador. So this card is really good in this deck, and it's just super awesome to have, and it synergizes really well with our yugioh and Conquistador because those cards both let you get that card directly on the field. Next up, we are running Ice Dragon's Prison. So this card is obviously really good. It's a great staple card. We can special summon an opponent's monster from their graveyard to our side of a field. Its effects are negated, but this card is still really powerful. Also, you can banish one monster from both players' graveyard that have the same type, so that can be really useful depending on the deck you're playing against, but obviously the first effect is really strong as it is. It's just a nice bonus when you can use the second effect. Next up, we have Torrential Tribute, which is just going to be one of those classic cards we're using to lock out our opponent. If they summon a monster, we destroy all of them. It's pretty self-explanatory. Next up, we have Trap Trick, which is another classic. We can banish one of our traps and set another one directly onto the field. So this is going to be really good depending on what we need. So for example, if we really need our Eldlich desperately, we can get it out with that. We can do Dogmatic Punishment. We can do any card in this deck, which is really, really nice. Then we have yugioh. So this card synergizes with Eldlich because if he is on the field, you can banish a card from either player's graveyard, which is really a handy effect. And we've already talked about its second effect, which lets us get ourselves an Eldlich. Conquistador functions similarly in that it is a trap that you can summon as a normal monster. And also, if you control Eldlich, you are able to destroy one face-up card on the field. So this is also really great. You can destroy your own cards with this too as well, which is really handy. And it has the same secondary effect as yugioh. Next up, we have Goes and Match. We talked about this a little already, but basically you can only control one attribute of monster, which is very handy. And I think this is really great to play once your opponent has already set up their board, as long as you can execute it successfully. You will be able to destroy those cards as well, which is always super annoying. So I normally wait to play this one until they already have a few cards on the field. Next up, we have Summon Limit. So if I were playing, I would probably want to activate this towards the beginning of my opponent's turn, as opposed to Goes and Match, where I'd want to do it a bit later on in their combo. You can only summon twice per turn, which is really great. This isn't too much of a restriction for us, but for most combo decks, it can be a big restriction. So I really like this card, and I think it's really good in here. Next up, we just have a few more classic cards, those being Solemn Judgment, Solemn Strike, Needle Sealing, and Imperial Order. So our Solemns and Imperial Order are just going to be our negates that are going to let us basically lock out our opponent, and we have 7 of those in here, so that's pretty solid. We also have Needle Sealing, where if there are 4 more monsters on the field, you can destroy them all. So this is really good if you're playing against something like heroes, you can Needle Sealing them. So that's it for our main deck. Our goal is to basically lock out our opponent long enough for us to go for the win. So let's look at our extra deck a bit more closely. And another note that I'd like to make is that if you have Lord of the Heavenly Prism, or if your budget is a bit higher, I would strongly recommend adding that to this deck. And also, as you can see, there are a few cards in here that are somewhat expensive, like around $5, but a lot of these are already staple cards, things like Solemn Judgment, Solemn Strike. A lot of people probably already have those cards, so if you do, that will definitely bring the cost of this deck down a lot, or if you have things like Ice Dragon's Prison. So let's look at our extra deck, which is full of fairly cheap cards as well. Also guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It'll help keep you notified when I upload videos like this, because I do come out with a lot of these types of videos, and I really want to get to 1,000 subscribers, and it would just really help me out with that. Okay, now let's get into the deck. Next up, we have an Elder Entity here. So this card has a good graveyard effect as well. You can target one card on the field and destroy it, which is quite nice. Next up, we are running Cyframe Lord Omega. This is another one of the cards that we are adding to our deck for its graveyard effect, which lets you target it and another card in the graveyard and shuffle them back into the deck. So after that, we also have ourselves a Wind Pegasus. This card also has a graveyard effect, and you can banish this card and target one card your opponent controls and shuffle it into the deck. This is also really good for getting around cards that can't be destroyed. It's just a really handy card to have. So we are also going to be running Gustav and Lebe. These can be used in conjunction to go for the wind. With Gustav, you're going to use your 2 Eldliches. That's why I said Eldlich is a really good card to have in here, because it is a level 10. So you use your 2 Eldliches, and then you can go in for 2,000 with Gustav, and then you can go into Lebe for the win. And the same goes for Sky Palace. You use it similarly to Gustav. These are also really good for using with Dogmatic Punishment, where if you need a really high attack monster to destroy something your opponent controls, you can use these if need be for that purpose. We are also running Constellar Pleiades. This card will let you detach a card and then return 1 card on the field to the hand. So obviously super handy. You will be using this with your Huaquero and your Conquistador, because they are both level 5s, which is actually pretty handy. Then we are running Nightmare Unicorn. This is just a staple card, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. We are also running Lina the Light Charmer. This makes sense because this is a light focused deck. This card is going to be really good if we are playing against any light focused decks. So an example that comes to mind is Dogmatica. This will be pretty handy against that, and I've definitely seen it come in handy. Next up, we are running Wind, which is basically the same thing but for wind monsters, and we are using that in conjunction with Imduk because it is a wind card. We have this in here because it lets us get cards into the graveyard very quickly, and that's also why Link Spider is in here, because they are both Link 1, and Imduk will just let us go into Wind Charmer because obviously we need a wind monster and it is the only one in our deck, so it is a handy way to get an extra card into the graveyard and also get the Wind Charmer out if need be. So as you can see with this deck, there are a few different win conditions. You don't have to be playing perfectly to win with this deck, and I really like this deck because it's kind of hard to break with it. You really just need to be able to set a bunch of cards and at least lock out your opponent till you get what you need to. Obviously some hands are better than others, but I think this is a really good deck to play right now, and it's very different from pretty much any other meta deck right now, although it is still a really great contender and it is really fun to play with. It's also fairly versatile. You can really change out the traps in this deck for whichever ones that you already have. For example, if you have Pot of Extravagance, that would be really good in this deck as well, and like I already mentioned, Lord of the Heavenly Prism would be great as well, and you can also switch out your extra deck monsters depending on what you have. I've seen people run all sorts of cards in here, and I don't think there's really a wrong way to play this deck, obviously within reason. So I hope you guys liked this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you did, and give this video a like, and let me know what other decks you'd like to see me do, or if there are other types of Yu-Gi-Oh videos you'd like to see me make. Again, please subscribe to my channel, and a quick shout out to my friend who helped me with this deck. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.